You were taught to believe that Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, and Slavoj Zizek represent the pinnacle of contemporary intellectual achievement. Philosophy departments venerate them. Cultural critics quote them. Their books line the shelves of every serious university library. If you struggle to understand them, you probably blamed yourself, assumed you weren't sophisticated enough, hadn't read enough theory, needed more graduate seminars. But what if I told you the confusion isn't your failure? What if these three celebrated minds share a secret technique that academia desperately doesn't want you to recognize? Roger Scruton saw it clearly. While his fellow intellectuals in the 1970s and 80s were genuflecting before French theory and Slovenian provocation, Scruton, who'd witnessed the 1968 Paris riots firsthand, who'd taught philosophy to dissidents behind the Iron Curtain, recognized something disturbing. These thinkers weren't seeking truth through language. They were wielding language as a weapon to accumulate power. The secret isn't a conspiracy. It's a methodology. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Foucault, Derrida, and Zizek all practice what George Orwell called Newspeak. Language designed not to describe reality, but to control how you think about reality. They replace neutral description with moralized manipulation. They abolish individual responsibility and replace it with abstract systemic blame. Let me show you how it works. Because understanding this pattern will liberate you from decades of academic intimidation. If you ever felt gaslit reading postmodern theory, sensing that profound-sounding sentences actually mean nothing, you're not crazy. If you've noticed that contemporary progressive discourse uses words like power, violence, and justice in ways that seem deliberately slippery, you're onto something. Scruton spent his career translating academic obscurity into honest English, and he had these three figured out completely. By the end of this exploration, you'll recognize the shared trick. You'll understand why Scruton called it intellectual corruption, and you'll have the clarity to resist linguistic manipulation disguised as philosophical depth. If you want to discover more clear-eyed analysis of intellectual movements that shaped our confused present, subscribe to this channel where we explore the thinking of philosophers who value truth over academic fashion. Here's what fascinates me about Scruton's approach to these thinkers. He didn't dismiss them as stupid. Far from it. Foucault, Derrida, and Zizek are brilliant. That's precisely what makes them dangerous. Scruton understood that intelligent people can use their intelligence for purposes other than truth. Think about it this way. Imagine you're a master craftsman with two options. You can build a beautiful cathedral that will stand for centuries, or you can build an elaborate trap that looks like a cathedral but collapses when people trust their weight to it. Both require skill. Both demonstrate mastery. But only one serves human flourishing. Scruton saw that postmodern and neo-Marxist thinkers had chosen the trap. The pattern has three elements, and once you recognize them, you'll spot them everywhere in contemporary discourse. First, they use language to obscure rather than clarify. Where traditional philosophy seeks precise definitions and clear arguments, these thinkers cultivate deliberate ambiguity. When you can't pin down what a word means, the theorist controls its meaning moment by moment. Scruton experienced this firsthand in academic debates. He'd ask a Foucauldian colleague to define power, and the answer would shift based on what was politically convenient. Is power something governments wield, or is it diffused through all social relationships? Does it flow from institutions, or does it constitute institutions? The answer depends on which claim needs defending at that moment. Second element, they moralize neutral concepts. This is pure Newspeak. In Orwell's 1984, the party doesn't say, we're going to war because we want resources. They say, we defend peace through necessary military action. The word peace now means war. Similarly, these thinkers don't say, I disagree with this policy. They say this discourse enacts violence or this practice embodies oppression. Notice what happens. If I say, I disagree with requiring diversity statements for academic jobs, we can debate the policy's merits. But if you say, opposing diversity statements enacts violence against marginalized bodies, you've moved the conversation from practical reason to moral emergency. Disagreement becomes assault. Debate becomes complicity and harm. Scruton, who valued what he called plain speaking, found this moralization profoundly dishonest. It smuggles conclusions into vocabulary. It makes certain questions unaskable. Third element, they abolish individual agency and responsibility. When Foucault analyzes human behavior, individuals disappear. You don't make choices. Discourse speaks through you. Power relations determine your actions. Episteme structure what you can think. When Derrida deconstructs texts, there's no stable authorial intention, only infinite play of signifiers. When Zizek discusses politics, individual moral actors vanish into ideology and the big other. You know what this reminds me of? Religious doctrines of total depravity. Except instead of original sin, it's systemic oppression. Instead of Satan, it's capitalism or patriarchy or Western logocentrism. And instead of redemption through Christ, it's redemption through revolution. But here's the crucial difference Scruton identified. Traditional religious frameworks still held individuals accountable. You were a sinner, yes, but you sinned. You could repent. You face judgment. In the postmodern framework, there's no you at all. Just systems, just structures, just discourses, which means, conveniently, that when things go wrong, nobody's responsible. When Zizek defends revolutionary violence, and he does openly, he's not advocating that specific people kill specific other people. He's saying the system requires radical rupture. The blood doesn't touch his hands because there are no hands, only historical forces. Scruton called this what it is, a sophisticated way to dodge moral accountability while claiming moral authority. Wait until you see how each of our three thinkers applies this pattern. Because Foucault, Derrida, and Zizek aren't identical. They have different styles, different obsessions, different academic territories. But the underlying methodology, the Newspeak technique, that's a shared secret. Let me show you how Foucault wielded it first, because in many ways, he set the template the others would follow. Michel Foucault, 1926 to 1984, became the most cited intellectual in humanities departments worldwide. His books, Discipline and Punish, The History of Sexuality, Madness and Civilization, are considered mandatory reading. Universities hire Foucault scholars the way they hire Shakespeare scholars. Scruton read Foucault carefully, and what he found wasn't profound philosophy, but a shell game with the concept of power. Here's Foucault's core move. He claims that what we call truth is actually just power in disguise. Knowledge doesn't represent reality. It constructs reality in ways that serve those who control knowledge production. Medicine doesn't discover facts about bodies. It creates medicalized subjects who can be controlled. Psychiatry doesn't identify mental illness. It manufactures categories of deviance that society punishes. Sounds radical, right? Almost liberating. Like you're seeing through the Matrix. But notice what Foucault's doing with language here. He takes the word power, which normally means the ability to make people do things, and stretches it to mean everything. Power isn't just what kings and policemen wield. It's in doctor-patient relationships. It's in how you understand your sexuality. It's in the architecture of schools. It's in grammar itself. When everything is power, what does the word mean anymore? Scruton pointed out the trap. If all truth claims are really power moves, then Foucault's own claims are power moves. He's not revealing how power works. He's exercising power by getting you to accept his framework. The theory becomes self-refuting the moment you apply it to itself. But here's the genius of the trick. Foucault writes in such a way that questioning him feels like you're defending oppression. If you say, wait, surely some medical knowledge actually corresponds to biological reality, you sound like you're denying that doctors have ever abused authority. If you suggest maybe psychiatric categories reflect real patterns of human suffering, you sound like you're defending forced institutionalization. See the Newspeak? Foucault has moralized the vocabulary. Truth now means oppression. Knowledge now means control. Normal now means violent exclusion of difference. I thought Scruton's analysis was devastating here. He asked, what happens to a society that accepts Foucault's framework? Answer: you lose the ability to distinguish between real abuse of authority and legitimate authority, between actual oppression and necessary social boundaries. Imagine this concrete scenario. A psychiatrist diagnoses a patient with schizophrenia and prescribes medication. In a pre-Foucauldian world, we can debate, is the diagnosis accurate? Is the medication effective? Are there better treatments? Does this doctor have the patient's interests at heart? In a Foucauldian world, the diagnosis itself is a disciplinary technology. The medication is normalization. The psychiatrist is an agent of biopower. The patient is a subject produced by medicalized discourse. Notice what's been lost. The patient's real suffering disappears into theory. The possibility of genuine help vanishes. All that's left is power and resistance to power. Scruton saw this pattern play out in universities. Students read Foucault and suddenly couldn't take anything at face value. Every institution was suspect. Every authority figure was oppressive. Every truth claim was a disguised power grab. And here's what makes it Newspeak. The students never applied this suspicion to Foucault himself. His books became scripture, not subject to the same critical method. He applied everything else. You know what else Foucault did? He wrote about sex constantly. The History of Sexuality is his most famous work, but always in abstract, theoretical terms. Never, here's what I believe about human sexuality and why. Always, here's how discourse on sexuality functions as biopower. This creates endless ambiguity. Is Foucault defending any particular sexual practice? Is he condemning any? You can't tell because he's hidden his actual positions inside layers of theoretical machinery. Scruton called this cowardice dressed as sophistication. If Foucault believes something specific, that certain taboos are harmful, that certain freedoms are valuable, why not say so plainly and defend it with honest arguments? Because plain speech would expose the argument to plain refutation. Obscurity is protective armor. That's the first application of the pattern. Now watch how Derrida takes it even further, making instability itself the point. Jacques Derrida, 1930 to 2004, might be the most influential philosopher you've never been able to understand. His prose is notoriously impenetrable. Students spend entire seminars debating what a single Derrida paragraph means, which is ironic because Derrida's whole project is denying that meaning can be stable. Scruton had no patience for this, and I love his honesty about it. Derrida's central technique is deconstruction. The idea, roughly, any text contains internal contradictions. Words depend on other words for meaning. Cat means not dog. Light means not dark. So meaning is always deferred, never present. Authors can't control what their texts mean because language itself is unstable. Fixed interpretation is impossible. Sounds sophisticated. Universities hire Derrida disciples by the hundreds. Deconstruction became the dominant method in literature departments. But here's what Scruton noticed. Derrida's followers never deconstructed Derrida. His texts were accorded a stability, a determinate meaning that he claimed no text could have. This is Newspeak in action. The rule is there are no stable meanings, except for the rule itself, which you must interpret stably and correctly or you don't understand Derrida. Let me make this concrete. Derrida wrote an essay called Plato's Pharmacy, deconstructing Plato's Phaedrus. He focuses on the Greek word pharmakon, which means both cure and poison. Derrida argues this ambiguity destabilizes Plato's entire argument about writing. If the key term contains its opposite, the text collapses into undecidability. Scruton's response: yes, Greek words often have multiple meanings. That's why you use context to determine which meaning applies. When Plato calls writing a pharmakon, the context makes clear whether he means it's beneficial or harmful in that instance. Derrida's discovery is only impressive if you ignore how language actually works. But notice the move. Derrida has taken a normal feature of language, words have multiple potential meanings, and inflated it into a metaphysical crisis. Meaning itself is impossible. That's the linguistic manipulation. That's the trick. And here's where it becomes Newspeak. Once you accept that texts have no stable meaning, you get to decide what they mean, not based on authorial intent, not based on evidence, based on your interpretive power. This is why Derrida's method became a weapon in culture wars. You can deconstruct any text, say, the US Constitution, to reveal hidden oppression. The founders thought they were establishing equality, but deconstruction reveals they actually encoded white supremacy. How do we know? Because deconstruction finds it there. Can't refute this? Because there's no stable text to refute. Can't defend the founders' actual intentions? Because authorial intention is a myth. You're trapped in quicksand. Every effort to establish solid ground just pulls you deeper. Scruton saw this for what it was, a method that makes productive disagreement impossible. If we can't agree on what a text says, we can't debate whether what it says is true. We're left with competing power moves dressed as interpretations. I thought about how this affected real people. Imagine you're a literature student who loves Shakespeare. You think Hamlet is about a man wrestling with impossible moral choices. You find it beautiful, tragic, profound. Your deconstructionist professor says, actually, Hamlet is about the instability of masculine identity under patriarchy. Hamlet's hesitation reveals the performative contradictions of gender norms. Can you disagree? Not really. Because if you say, I don't think Shakespeare meant that, the answer is authorial intention is irrelevant. If you say the text doesn't support that reading, the answer is all readings are equally valid or equally suspect. You've been disarmed. Your love of the play, your honest response to it, has been dismissed as naive. You either accept the approved interpretation or admit you don't understand theory. This is how Newspeak works. It doesn't argue you into submission. It rigs a linguistic game, so your arguments can't get traction. Derrida abolished stable meaning. Zizek, our third example, takes the pattern to its logical and terrifying conclusion, abolishing moral limits on political action. If this revelation impacts you as much as it does me, hit like so more people can discover this pattern operating in their universities, their workplaces, their public discourse. Slavoj Zizek, born 1949, is still alive and still influential, which makes him particularly relevant. He's the most entertaining of our three, tells jokes, quotes movies, performs intellectual stand-up comedy. He seems harmless, even charming. Scruton would tell you, don't be fooled. Zizek is the most dangerous because he openly advocates revolutionary violence while making it sound like abstract philosophy. Zizek is a Lacanian Marxist, which means he combines psychoanalysis, itself dubious, with Marxist economics, itself discredited, and produces what Scruton would say, sophisticated justification for political brutality. Here's Zizek's core move. He claims that our everyday peaceful society actually is violent. Systemic violence embedded in capitalism, in property relations, in the symbolic order itself. This violence is invisible precisely because it's structural. When homeless people freeze to death while empty apartments sit unsold, that's violence. When wages don't keep pace with productivity, that's violence. Now comes a Newspeak. If the status quo is already violent, then revolutionary violence isn't introducing violence. It's responding to violence. In fact, revolutionary disruption might be less violent than maintaining the current peaceful brutality. See the trick? Zizek has moralized the vocabulary. Violence no longer means initiating physical force. It means anything I want condemn. And peace no longer means absence of initiated force. It means acceptance of oppression. So when Zizek says, and he does say this, that revolutionary terror might be necessary, that we might need less pseudo-liberal tolerance and more rational intolerance, what does he mean concretely? Scruton would push. Does he mean guillotines? Firing squads? Gulags? And if not, why use that rhetoric? And if yes, why the academic smokescreen? This is what makes Zizek's Newspeak so pernicious. He'll praise Lenin, defend Robespierre, hint at the necessity of divine violence, a concept from Walter Benjamin meaning violence outside legal moral frameworks, but always with enough ironic distance, enough theoretical layering, that he can claim you're misunderstanding its complex. I find this deeply dishonest, and so did Scruton. If you believe political violence is sometimes justified, make an explicit argument with specific conditions. Tell us when, tell us why, tell us what limits apply. That's what honest moral reasoning looks like. But Zizek won't do that because it would expose his position to clear critique. Instead, he hides behind ideology critique, claiming that asking for clarity is itself ideological. Here's a concrete example. Zizek has written that we need to be more cold and cruel in political analysis, that we should abandon all taboos, including the taboo against violence. He's praised the Chinese Communist Party's efficiency. He suggested that liberal tolerance is a greater evil than totalitarian honesty. What does this mean practically? If you're a student absorbing this, what are you learning? That violence in pursuit of real justice is acceptable? That liberal democratic norms are hypocritical obstacles? That your squeamishness about bloodshed is bourgeois sentimentality? Scruton, who taught dissidents in communist Czechoslovakia, who saw what abandoning taboos actually produces, found his rhetoric obscene, not because he was squeamish. He understood that force is sometimes necessary in defense, but he insisted on moral clarity about it. You don't dress up violence in theoretical sophistication. You don't make it abstract. You face what you're actually proposing. This is the final application of the pattern. Abolish individual responsibility. In Zizek's framework, when revolutionary violence occurs, who's responsible? Not individual humans making choices. It's historical necessity. It's dialectical development. It's ideology forcing its own resolution. Nobody pulls the trigger. The system pulls the trigger. You just happen to be holding the gun when history fires. This is Newspeak taken to its logical conclusion. Language that makes clear moral thinking impossible. You can't identify victims and perpetrators because there are only subject positions within structures. You can't say this act was wrong because the act disappears into theoretical abstraction. Scruton saw the pattern clearly. Foucault destabilizes truth. Derrida destabilizes meaning. Zizek destabilizes moral limits. Each builds on the last. Each makes honest disagreement harder. Each accumulates intellectual prestige while corroding the foundations of reasoned debate. But why does academia embrace them? That's what we need to understand next. Here's the question that bothered Scruton throughout his career. Why do universities, institutions supposedly dedicated to truth, venerate thinkers who undermine truth-seeking? The answer has several layers, and each reveals something uncomfortable about contemporary academic culture. First, obscurity signals sophistication. If you can understand Derrida, you must be smart. If you can't, you're not smart enough. This creates a priestly class of interpreters whose status depends on maintaining the mystery. Scruton encountered this constantly. He'd give a public lecture explaining conservative principles in clear English. Critics would dismiss him as simplistic or journalistic, not because his arguments were wrong, but because they were comprehensible. Meanwhile, Foucault disciples would present papers so opaque that even other specialists couldn't follow them, and everyone would nod appreciatively. This is academic status anxiety weaponized. The harder you are to understand, the more profound you must be. Clarity becomes suspect. It must mean you're not engaging with sufficient complexity. But here's the trap. Once you've invested years learning to speak Foucauldian or Derridian or Lacanian, you've sunk tremendous costs. Admitting the emperor has no clothes means admitting you wasted years of your life. Much easier to defend the investment, recruit new initiates, and maintain the prestige hierarchy. Second reason, political usefulness. These theories provide sophisticated vocabulary for progressive politics. Want to attack capitalism? Foucault gives you biopower and disciplinary regimes. Want to undermine Western culture? Derrida gives you logocentrism and deconstruction. Want to justify radical activism? Zizek gives you systemic violence and ideology critique. Scruton noticed this pattern. These theories never threaten left-wing orthodoxy. They never deconstruct Marxism. They never reveal hidden power in progressive movements. They're weapons aimed exclusively at Western liberal civilization, traditional morality, and market economics. This isn't coincidence. It's the point. Think about how this plays out in hiring. If you're a conservative philosopher who writes clearly and defends tradition, you're ideological, biased, lacking critical perspective. But if you're a Marxist who writes incomprehensibly and attacks everything Western, you're rigorous, theoretically sophisticated, politically engaged. The same institution that demands diversity replicates ideological uniformity. Why? Because the shared Newspeak vocabulary, power, discourse, systemic violence, hegemony, signals tribal membership. You're on the team. You're safe. Third reason, and this one's deepest, these theories excuse moral failure. If all truth is power, then your pursuit of truth is really pursuit of power. You're no better than anyone else. If meaning is unstable, then your careful arguments are just power moves. No moral high ground there. If systemic violence permeates everything, then your hands are already bloody. might as well join the revolution. This is what Scruton called a fantasy of infinite suspicion. By making everything suspect, you paradoxically excuse yourself from moral accountability. You're not responsible for getting things right, because nothing's definitively right. You're not responsible for institutional failures, because institutions are just power structures anyway. I think about graduate students entering this environment. They arrive idealistic, wanting to pursue truth, contribute knowledge, serve students. The system teaches them. Truth is naive, knowledge is power, service is oppression. Within a few years, they're either broken or converted. Those who resist, who insist on clarity, who defend truth-seeking, who notice that critique only flows in one direction, face a choice: conform or leave. Many leave. Academia loses people who might have challenged orthodoxy. Those who stay learn the language game. They publish in approved journals, using approved vocabulary about approved topics. They cite Foucault and Derrida and Žižek not because these thinkers advance human understanding, but because citation is the currency of academic legitimacy. Scruton refused to play. He wrote for general audiences in clear prose. He defended unpopular positions with honest arguments. He acknowledged complexity while insisting on the possibility of truth. The Academy punished him for it, denied him prestigious positions, excluded him from conferences, dismissed his work as popular, meaning comprehensible, rather than scholarly, meaning opaque. But here's what the Academy couldn't do. They couldn't refute him, because refutation requires shared standard of evidence and logic. And once you've adopted Newspeak, once you denied stable meaning and objective truth, you've disarmed yourself. Scruton won by refusing to fight on their linguistic terrain. And that's the lesson we need to take from this. So now you know the secret that Foucault, Derrida, and Zizek share. Language is weapon, not window. Newspeak disguised as profundity. Power accumulation dressed as theory. Scruton saw it because he valued something these thinkers abandoned: the possibility of honest disagreement. You can't disagree honestly if words have no stable meaning. You can't debate if all arguments are just power moves. You can't reason together if moral categories are abolished. Here's your practical application. When you encounter impressive-sounding academic language, ask one question. Could this be said clearly? If yes, why isn't it? If no, why should you believe it? Genuine insight survives translation into plain speech. Intellectual manipulation requires obscurity. As Scruton wrote, beauty is an ultimate value, something that we pursue for its own sake. So is truth. So is clarity. Don't let anyone convince you that confusion is sophistication or that honesty is naivete. The next time someone quotes Foucault on power, Derrida on meaning, or Zizek on violence, you'll recognize the pattern. You'll see the Newspeak. You'll know the secret. And you'll be free to think clearly again. Subscribe to continue this journey through thinkers who value truth over tribal prestige. Next, we'll explore how Scruton defended beauty in an age that calls ugliness progress. Until then, think clearly, speak honestly, resist the linguistic manipulation.